Gentlemen, ladies, I'm Protogo. This is Prototype. We are going to be talking about Cosmonarchy, RTS games, conversations, and answering epic questions from epic people who send us money on the weekly or monthly or, however often they do. Let's talk about everything, in fact. This is going to be a podcast where I kind of bounce around a little bit because there's a number of conversation topics to hit, but I think we can probably pretty safely start off this episode by talking about a recent conversation published to the No Frauds Club YouTube channel. And it is very much near and dear to my heart. That's right. We're going to be talking about my conversation with SaiyanSC, or on YouTube is known as SaiyanKCM. It's a little over a 90-minute or around 90 minutes there on the other channel over there where I do publish those kinds of conversations. We cover a lot about what made Brood War great, what maybe could be improved upon Brood War, how new developers should be thinking about making an RTS game. And we also get into the nitty-gritty of certain details like the competitive formats for some of the tournaments that are in Brood War between the KCM Race Survivor Series as well as ASL itself, Afrika Star League. So let's talk about my thoughts after this episode has finished. I think the first thing that immediately hit me was that it was really cool to get somebody who's like the opinions of someone who has spent a very large portion of their adult life consuming and also creating Brood War centric content and streaming it and playing the game and all this other stuff that Saiyan has done. And getting his opinions and being able to pick his brains, it was definitely a worthwhile conversation. It's unlikely to do the same amount of numbers that some of our other conversations have done, but I think it was still a nice little trip down memory lane in some respects to go back into what it must have looked like, what it must have been like to experience, Brood War and some of the professional stuff for maybe not the first time, but just like from a pair of fresh eyes. And some people who, they don't have the same sort of tendencies and biases that I do, where I'm thinking about Brood War as like a stepping stone to something better. And in their minds, they've tried out other RTS games. They've certainly seen other RTS games, but they're not necessarily thinking that something can surpass it. And if they have that belief that something can be better, if they're even thinking about it at all, they're imagining it's something as like a hypothetical and not something that could have already existed or something that may exist in the more near future. And that's where I think it's really helpful to have conversations with people like Saiyan, people from the Brood War community. And regardless of the viewership or whatever, regardless of the numbers that it does, I'm just happy that we get a chance to talk to people like that who are really embedded within the scene. Because, my ideas will proliferate through them in some respects, right? Maybe some of the ideas that I have for cool concepts that would improve things, even if they're on the minor side and they're not like the total conversion level stuff that we have in Cosmonarchy. Maybe there's still going to be some little bits here and there that kind of like plant the seed and then watch it sprout a little bit later on, as far as, maybe this is something to think about for, other RTSs. And the other thing that I think that is more directly pertinent to some of what I do is that we had a conversation, like I mentioned, about some of the details regarding what new developers should be thinking about. And specifically, Saiyan talked about how there's not really that much of a focus on making the game fun anymore. Modern developers, and even in StarCraft 2's case as well, are trying to force the esport, the competitive side, as opposed to just making a game where it is fun and exciting and stuff. And I actually think that this has rubbed off on a lot of the player base for these games as well, where they believe that if the game isn't designed to be an esport, if it's designed to be fun and bombastic and crazy, if it's designed to have really powerful abilities like Brood War has and like Cosmonarchy has, when you think about like glassing somebody's base or building diadems and lifting them off, and, all the Sovereign, the infestation mechanics, the mind control, the domination, the reclamation, all of this stuff, there's so many wacky things that go on that you can pretty much pillory if you're feeling uncharitable and say, well, there's no way that's balanced, that's OP, that's busted, that's crazy. And you could even be right, but the point is that we're designing maybe a little bit more on the for fun side, and we're considering how to rein it in after the fact to make it a little bit more balanced if it needs to be that way. And even then, we have a very sort of tepid reaction to those things. We try to take our time for the balancing. Balancing is another conversation topic of this particular talk with Saiyan. And, Saiyan makes the point that, you shouldn't necessarily design for the esport, the competitive side first, which is something I've always believed anyway. But more and more lately, I've become a lot more bullish on that. Like, people just completely ignore the potential for the single player perspective or the co-op perspective or the stuff that's not really related to competitive play. They completely ignore that and they just kind of phone that in or make it completely not a game anyway, like it's just more of a movie. And they discard all of that because, their focus is on the multiplayer. And so that always gets the shaft where even if a lot of budget goes into it, it's still not really actually showing that much. You know what I mean? So I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that it feels to me like there's a pretty big missed opportunity in pretty much all modern RTS games. And I think that Saiyan has helped to put that into words because he's coming from a much more nailed down perspective that's very much limited to Brood War, and he understands that Brood War was not designed to be an RTS that is competitive, that is going to last for 20 plus years, and that's actually why it's lasted for a quarter of a century, right? And so at least in part of it, that is why. But there's a lot of luck associated with that, and there's still a perpetual motion machine. It feels like keeping it going, but I don't think it would have been like that if it was trying to court the idea of being an esport from the get-go. And so it was a little bit of catharsis because that's mostly what we've been focusing on over here at the No Frauds Club, building out our prototypes, trying to see if we can make something that is actually really fun to play first and foremost. And, you have to have balance in some aspect because it's not fun to lose to something that's just an auto win. And it's also not fun to win with something that's an auto win. Challenge is intrinsic to the nature of the game and the nature of the beast for that sort of thing. And so being able to explore those kinds of things, but still recognizing that if you're specifically trying to carve out a niche for a competitive scene, and you're doing it through the gameplay itself, like making changes to the gameplay or designing the gameplay such that it can be kind of solved like that. I think it's a great opportunity for new designers to maybe have their perspectives checked a little bit by that kind of conversation. So I do highly recommend checking it out and posting your thoughts in that video's comment section. And, if you have any leftovers that you want to roll over in here, we always accept comments on this channel as well. So yeah, a little bit of a musings, a retrospective after that particular conversation. And we've got way more to cover now that that's off the docket. I do want to talk specifically about something that I've been working on a little bit more directly, which is it's kind of a nebulous topic because it's so vast. It's improving Cosmonarchy's audiovisuals. After this section, I'll be talking about March Invitational B, a tournament we just ran a couple days back, and we'll also be covering the Gauntlet stage of Acropolis #1, which is going to be forthcoming pretty soon this week, actually, because there's going to be 2 separate Gauntlets, so I'll get to that as well. And we'll close off before the coffee question section by talking about what I'm going to be doing after Acropolis, including some concrete details about the Protoss tutorial that is going to be worked on this week. So without further ado, talking yet again about Cosmonarchy's audiovisuals, that brings me to what you see on your screen right here. Take a good look at it. We've got the new Calculus. That's the graphic that maybe is the least familiar to people who have played Cosmonarchy. That is on that screen right there. It's to the left of the HelltRYKS. It's to the in between the HelltRYKS and the Larvosk Caesiant. And yes, I understand that if you don't play Cosmonarchy, you probably have no idea what I just said. But yes, it's pretty cool. And the other thing that is happening in this screenshot is actually that we're seeing birth animations from the egg for the Gorgor, which is to the right of the HelltRYKS, and then behind the Gorgor, birth animations for the Tetzoricor. Now, those 2 graphics are placeholder. They're not like the Calculus. They're not like the Nathricor that's directly above the HelltRYKS, for example. These graphics are going to eventually be replaced by Solstice or somebody else who's going to be making those models from scratch, animating them, etc. And the Calculus was just now added after March Invitational B came to a close. So that was a pretty recent sort of discovery, if you will. He was working on it that Saturday evening, and I was able to put it into the game Sunday. And so here it is now. We're on Monday recording this, and it is indeed in the game and lovely. Certainly an improvement over using a game's asset that wasn't actually rendered at the right facing angle, has a lot of lighting issues, and ultimately doesn't necessarily look like an actual Zerg asset either. So, even though there's going to be some adjustments later on, presumably, there certainly could be anyway, I'm leaving the door open for that. I think it's still a nice dub, a nice win to get yet another custom asset into the game. And the birth animations in the background, even though those graphics are ultimately placeholder and will eventually be replaced, are still really important to have in the game because for as long as they're there, for as long as we have those units in the game, we want to make sure that there's as little jittering and distracting aspects to them as possible, besides the fact that they just kind of stick out since they're placeholder. And I've long had the Gorgor coming out of a cocoon and then, jumping up into the sky afterwards, and it just looks super jank. And I'm glad that I was able to bang that out in yesterday's development session. By the way, development sessions are always streamed on YouTube and Twitch. You can drop me a follow on some of those, subscribe to the channel, etc., and you'll always be notified of those sorts of things if you hit the bell or if you just pay attention to when the sub feed goes up. And we also post about when the streams are going live on the Discord server, which you can also join by following a link in the description below. And the reason why I say all that stuff is because while I'm developing the game and while I'm making some of these art assets, I'm always happy to take questions, talk about design topics, and see what people have to say. So if you hop on in, you can get yourself a little bit of live interaction with the guy who's making a lot of this stuff here and collaborating with a lot of the other people in the server and in the community. Get a little bit more of that community feel going than just watching from afar, listening to these episodes and checking it out that way. But enough of that. That's just the invitation if you're interested. The audiovisual work is something that, I was musing about this with Veek last night before I went to bed because he woke up to get his stuff done because obviously he's in European time. So it's a bit of a gap there for our time zones. And I was staying up way too late hanging out with the homies, which is another thing we do on the Discord server from time to time. And one of the things that came to mind was just, the audiovisuals actually make a huge difference for making something feel complete. And even though the architect, for example, a Protoss siege weapon, is a placeholder asset. When I added a visual read for its charge up, it instantly felt like 50% more complete as a unit, or some arbitrary significant percent more complete as a unit. And I think that's pretty amazing. The idea that you can get that much mileage out of just adding one read. And so there's a number of other things that I'm thinking about. The Patriarch passive is a pretty big one now that those are seeing more play. And even though that asset is very much placeholder, if we could at least get some sort of debuff onto the units that it debuffs, I think that would be phenomenal. Then there's also things like I would argue that, the Madcap, when it gets fully charged, there should be a sound effect. And there should probably be some kind of visual that indicates that it is at full capacity, but I would look for something that's low noise, that at least like when you look at it, you can clearly see it. But the idea would be to not have it like sort of distractingly animate and take up your attention. But you should be able to immediately look at it and say, oh shit, this guy's at full stacks. Maybe we could also replace the sound effect or something from its weapon fire with something or like play an additional sound in addition to it when it fires with full stacks to help indicate that visually. Sort of like what we do with the Olympian when it's attacking from the back with its back turn and getting its benefit. So anyway, these are all details that I think are worth putting out, just having a full visual pass on all of the abilities and stuff. It's long overdue. And even if we're using a bunch of placeholder effects for it, it's still better than having nothing, sort of like the birth animations being hand-drawn, or hand-animated, I should say, by the stuff for like the Gorga core and the Tetzora core that I mentioned earlier. So these are things that are long overdue, yes, but now that we're getting them in, it's so nice. It makes such a huge difference that we have Swarming Omen reads for the Zoryustaleth. That actually just makes the unit feel way better and way more interesting. So it's funny because, like the unit is also another placeholder graphic, and yet it still feels like more of a unit now that it has its ability, it has those reads. So if you're also somebody who's working on, designs, like I know we have some people who work on mods or games or whatever for other genres even, or certainly other games as opposed to Brood War, if you can get some unique and cool audio visuals in, even if it takes you, an hour or 2 hours to do one thing, I promise you it's worth it. You got to think of it kind of like programming, or if you fix a bug that takes you, an hour to fix, but it saves 10 seconds every time that bug would have happened. And, you're saving 10 seconds for every person who uses your piece of software for, X or Y, number of times per day that it would have happened. You can imagine that adds up to way more than an hour, right? And so that's the same thing. Is like every time the unit is used, it'll be that much more complete. And you're doing that, you're improving the game. Like you can't put a quantity on how far you're improving the game just by doing that. So, if you've been slacking on that particular aspect or whatever, definitely take a look at that. It's a way to breathe more life into the game for sure, almost like immediately as soon as you finish it. So I thought that was worth paying some lip service to as we move on through the topic sheet. And, this is definitely something that I think I'll be continuing to make focus on, although it's not going to be the only focus of this week, but it's still something that I will be continuing to do as we get a little bit closer to, I guess you could say, asset completion, or at the very least, like a placeholder level asset completion, because we have a lot of things that just don't have graphics yet. So we're going to fix that. But hey, we had a tournament recently, and that tournament did have some of those audiovisual updates. The Zoryustaleth abilities, SFX, VFX, the architect VFX, the artisan VFX, although artisan didn't really get used, actually. I think I saw them a couple of times, but we didn't really see them harvest anything, funnily enough. And the demiurge worship VFX as well. So pretty cool stuff that we got to see some of that stuff in the actual tournament, that it was ready for that. So there's the linkage between the audiovisual section and the Invitational B section. But this tournament, it definitely told me for sure that, for example, Newt's Terran, clearly Class 1 material right now. He got bumped up from Class 2 based on his performance in this tournament. Immediately after that, he was very much unhappy with the way that demiurges can be interacted with using envoys, but even still, he's definitely still playing. He's definitely still hanging in there. We also had, who else won their group? Because the standings were such that the tournament essentially worked out to be the first group was Art of Turtle, 3 Crow, Newt in the reverse order. So Newt was first, 3 Crow second, Art of Turtle third. Art of Turtle then went on to be able to defeat people like Veek, and I think he played pretty well against Newt, but I'm not sure if he won against him. Definitely a lot of practice, though. That guy has signed up for the Gauntlet, so spoiler, I expect to see him in the group stage, the Battlement stage, as it's called now. I'll go over that at some point later on. But the main thing for me, too, is just to realize that we have people like Art of Turtle, like Urbmon, to gun it and to play this stuff and to really show us what for. Because when I see people multitask well, when I see people split their army nicely like Hapsea does, or even Urbmon does, you set up for flanks and do really cool stuff, that to me is just so exciting. It's exactly the kind of thing that I want to see from the player base, from the player base as far as skill goes and army control, but also being able to keep up with the macro. And I think we are absolutely going to see people be able to do stuff like that as time goes on. So yeah, the Group A, the Aquarium, it was kind of a slow starter. It actually had the only stability issue. We had the whole tournament, which it never feels good to have a stability issue during a tournament, but if it's only one, that might have been the smoothest running tournament that we've had in recent history. So that alone is pretty good. There were some other issues that plagued us. Group B was originally slated to have the Night Fox. I thought he would have had some really nice showings. Playing against Hamster and Veek 7, but unfortunately he was not able to make it. He stuck it out afterwards to try to see if he could play in Group C, however, everybody showed up for Group C, so he ended up not being needed to ring in after all. However, stepping in for him was Akko, who is a recent convert, a recent joining, a recent arrival. So we still had a debutante after all, and Akko took to the Terran role, which meant that this group originally was PZZ, now it was PZT, so we had all three races represented, which I'm a fan of. And Akko took on Veek 7 initially, then Hamster after that, and he didn't end up scoring any wins, just like Art of Turtle, but Akko did, I think, impress people with, considering he's never apparently played against Zerg before that, and he hadn't really played that much anything other than like 7 games of Terran and 3 games of Protoss up until then. So, for such a small number of matches, I think he struggled a little bit more in the TVP matchup. That's a bit more of a technical one where the Protoss can do a lot of things that you need kind of some element of knowledge to counteract. Whereas the Zerg are a little bit more straightforward in the early stages of the game and only explode a little bit more later on if you don't manage them well, which is essentially what ended up happening to Akko. But despite that, I do think that his extra practice are going to give him some nice edges and be able to, you're going to be able to see him do some pretty good things, I think, as the time goes on, assuming he decides to stick with the project. I mean, the fact that Art of Turtle keeps playing and signed up for the Gauntlet is pretty exciting. Akko said that he probably wants to play a little bit more before he signs up for the Gauntlet. We'll see if that changes in time for this one or if he's going to sign up for the second one. Nonetheless, though, Hamster impressed with first place despite losing the first match to Veek. We then found out that he didn't have his I think he didn't have his mnemonic keys set up. He had grid for the default because it was he didn't copy over his settings from pre-release because we obviously swapped to release. And so after that, he was able to come back and defeat Veek 2 games, defeat Akko 2 games, and claim his 4-1 scoreline to close out his group in first place. Veek, on the other hand, was able to secure second after defeating Akko. And then also this group did have the move that Newt is most hating right now, which is Hamster shuttling the Demiurge into the Terran's base, stealing the Ministry, and flying it away. And it's a very hard move to pull off. So if there's any, ability to catch the Envoy or to destroy the Demiurge itself, it does feel like you can counteract that. But despite whether or not it's counteractable. There's certain people who think that it's not a healthy interaction for the game or whatever. It's novel. It's like only been 3 days old now since Saturday. So we're still figuring out what we might do about that if it does need to change, or if there's going to be some obvious counterplay to it. And even if there is counterplay, maybe it's not satisfying counterplay. So I'm certainly open to that possibility to potentially changing it. But we just need to see a little bit more of it in action, I think, and have a little bit more time to consider a good change to make to it. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And for sure, we're going to have some more updates coming soon. On the third group, we had Niblime, we had Benno, and we had Urbmon. This was Zerg, Protoss, Zerg in that order. Benno obviously impressing by qualifying over Sipiak to get to this tournament after... and 3Crow qualified over Biddyby, I should mention that as well. And with Benno being able to play the Protoss way, he was able to go... a little bit scary versus Niblime, and also a little bit scary versus Urbmon, but both of those were only in really one of those matches each. Urbmon was in control of the starter on Axiom. Niblime cheesed him a little bit, or just went for a very aggressive opener and just dismantled him, because they both went pool first, but Quasilisks really, really put the hurt onto Zeths if you don't support them with workers. And even then, I feel like maybe it's still not a very winning strategy. So definitely something that, that's why the Quasis are more expensive, but it definitely felt a little bit bad that Urbmon had no idea what a Quasilisk was and then got slapped. But he then used them, and he was able to make it happen. He really impressed me in a sideshow match, and that was a ZVZ against Niblime. And I think his match on Impetus against Benno was very back and forth, and definitely had a lot of cool stuff associated with it. So Benno, unfortunately, was very tired after that. He was not able to make any scores on the board, but still, cool stuff. And Urbmon clinching second place. Niblime is obviously in first place, wins back some of the prize money that he's donated. He actually bumped it up, surprisingly, at the end, along with the Ozlix. The prize money went from 225 to 260 pretty quick, because we got 5 in from Enoz and 33 or something like that from Niblime. I can't remember how many. What would it be? Yeah, I guess it was 30. That would have been the missing amount. So pretty cool stuff to get a little bit extra cash in the, right at the end. Over on Group D, we had the group is called Fat Chance. I love anytime Jack Yelansky plays in a group, I have to have some aspect of like something _ chance, because his Discord username is A_ chance. I don't know. I like that for some reason. It makes the wordplay very easy. The Shambler's Terran ended up winning the day, but Jack Yelansky actually took some matches off of him, which is not the same thing that happened previously. Shambler was quick to discount the Infinite Velocity victory because he thinks that map is just guaranteed tier 3. I think that you can harass, but it remains to be seen. So far, all of the games have indeed gotten pretty late. So, his hypothesis is correct. I just feel like you could test that, and maybe it would, be exposed as incorrect with enough of the, good play in the mid stages of the game. Nonetheless, though, there could very well be some changes to a 2.1 version coming soon for that map. You never know. You never know. Hapsea did end up forfeiting after the initial 2 matches that he did play. He went 1 for 1. The Shambler was able to grind out a match on Titanforge against him. It was still definitely playable, and he had no idea that the Shambler was so close to breaking. But despite that, he felt he wasn't doing too hot, and he's like, get me out of here, basically. So that was how Group D ended up going. Jack Yelansky in second place as a result. And I should shout out, Hamster and Jack both gave me back and Akko as well. We got a first, second, and third placer just saying, here, keep the money. And Shambler hasn't figured out what he wants to do with his yet, but regardless of what he ends up doing, since that's not confirmed just yet, I did want to shout out those 3 individuals for saying, just use it for development or for more prize pool or whatever. And so we'll graciously accept that, and we'll say, hey, thanks, thank you guys. Now, that is the way that the results went. The individual matches, I'd say I feel like the Group A, what matches kind of went very... not necessarily one-sided all the time, but it was kind of like, there's a little bit of back and forth in some of the 3Crow Art of Turtle games, but eventually 3Crow was able to persevere. I think Newt... there was an interesting start to a match where Art went for a Circuit block on his ramp, and Newt immediately switched to air and took control of the pace of the game from there. But it was still pretty cool. So there's at least there's a novelty to that strategy. On the side of Group B, there were some pretty cool matches. Hamster versus Veek on Impetus comes to mind. I think Akko did a pretty good job of using Vultures against Veek on Titanforge, but he ended up, unfortunately, not able to move ahead from that point onward. And there might have been one other match between Hamster and Veek that was, notable or worthy of taking a look at. On the Group C side, we did have Nablime, Urbmon, and Benno. Obviously, Nablime and Urbmon played one of the matches of the whole event, which was that Sideshow ZVZ. I really liked that one. And then there was, of course, the Benno versus Urbmon on Impetus that I think was really cool because of Benno's fakes and the constant back and forth action. That's a high octane game. What else did we have for matches that were memorable? I actually think Upsea's match against the Shambler was pretty cool. Very, very drawn out in some aspects. The very long game Jack played against the Shambler where he busted out the Sovereigns and got to tier 3. It definitely had a lot of tension there, but again, it might have ended up. Maybe it looks a little bit one-sided in retrospect. I'm not sure that it does. There was back and forth, but maybe it was like a little bit lower. We're doing a build-up job on the cast, Nablime and I, but maybe if you're just watching it sort of like in silence or whatever, and looking at the replay and stuff, you might think to yourself, "Oh, there's not really that much happening." Like that could very well be the case because both of our players are kind of on their own in their own spheres, so to say. However, I do think that there were some really cool matches that the Shambler and Jack played. I think the Axia match is worth taking a look at if you want to come back against Terran as Zerg and see how you can defeat them when they're trying to do a bit of a switch. The other thing that is, I think, worth taking a look at are the Purgatory matches, or the matches on the Purgatory and on Impetus, particularly the Impetus match. I think there's a lot of back and forth there. Jack was in a point where there was a few times where he could have maybe defeated the Shambler in that particular matchup and then gone from there to go to another match to decide. He was pretty close to forcing a tiebreaker to end all tiebreakers, so to speak. So that would have been pretty cool. But unfortunately for him, he was not able to do it at the end of the day. But hey, these are the way that the matches work out. I really am a fan of how the game state is evolving. I think there's a lot of stuff that, there might be things like the Demiurge drop that if we decide is actually not healthy and there's no counterplay or no satisfying counterplay, and we end up changing it. Sure, there's probably a couple of interactions like that lurking beneath the surface. But if you take away those, or if you imagine those getting smoothed over in the future to be more interesting without like denying the value of it, there's definitely things that we can think about and improve on in the future. For me, I just really like the idea of considering what we're seeing in most games, because those are not like dominant strategies per se, the ones that are maybe a little bit more on the concerning side that we have to keep our eyes on. The idea that we have really cool matches to continue to look at is, for me, like the main thing that I want to keep tabs on and say, hey, this is really cool. This is really interesting. So yeah, just really bullish on the way that the game state is shaping up. Really quite excited to see what else is coming in the near future. And we do have something to talk about in the near future. So that is indeed where we will go next. I come to you now to tell you about the Acropolis Gauntlet stage. It is going to be the first Gauntlet that we run for Acropolis, and there will be a second one before the first Acropolis, if you follow my math. The qualifier is called the Gauntlet stage, the group stage is called the Battlements stage, and the playoffs are called the Throne Room stage. And I think that's pretty epic. So we have all these fancy names, just like we have fancy names for our units that confuse people day in, day out. And that's great because it means that they have to spend a little bit more time to get invested. I think, honestly, some people are probably going to be like, oh, whatever, those unit names are silly. But I think, honestly, there's going to be a subset of people out there who view that as a little bit of like an interesting challenge or intrigue or something like that. So I don't know, I'm just saying it could be a thing. But anyway, we have, of course, the concept, the idea of the Gauntlet, the qualifier. We've run one of these already before for Ascension number 7. We qualified 5 players, technically, because we had a situation where Mystery Meat ended up pulling out, and we needed to take the player who narrowly missed out on qualification. I think in the future, we would probably have the players who lost the lower qualification face off for a best of 5 to qualify if we needed another slot. And that's probably how we're going to handle it this time around, because I was thinking that it would probably happen, and maybe this is a bit naive of me, is that Acropolis number 1, the battlement stage, it has an invite system where the top 6 players from the previous tournament are the guys who place 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Those guys get an invite back into the next tournament. And for me, I thought that would be interesting because then you can say, oh yeah, well, I'm doing well in playoffs. I make past the first round. There we go. I'm in. I'm into the next one without having to go through the Gauntlet qualifier. And that is cool, right? That's the idea. And so that will be preserving that. I don't know if it'll be top 4 now or if it'll be top 6 again. I'll have to think about that a little bit more as we get closer into the Gauntlet stage itself, so that I can iron out all the rules ahead of battlements. But for me, I think it's cool to imagine that, oh yeah, of course they're going to accept the invites. However, some players have not responded to me, or they're not sure yet if they're going to accept the invite. So currently, we've got Hamster confirmed, Nablime confirmed, and the Shambler confirmed. And in the last tournament, it was Nablime, Hamster, Shambler. So we have the 3 strongest players by placement from the last tournament. However, of course, all 3 of them have switched races. At least I think Nablime will be Zerg this time around. He has time to change his mind. He doesn't have to submit his race until battlements, whereas the Gauntlet players have to submit their race and then play the same race the whole way through. Even if they qualify to the tournament, they can't switch it up after that. So anyway, that's cool to me. Like, I think that's fine. But cool to me is not necessarily cool to those guys. We've got iSarcasm's Protoss, although it doesn't matter what race he is now. He just needs to tell me what race it would be eventually. iSarcasm has not accepted his invite yet, and he also hasn't been very active, so he's probably very busy. Who else do we have? Veek doesn't know about the timetable yet. He's going to get back to me. And then Hubseya also is not confirmed yet either. He has to think about how much time he's got to practice and stuff like that. So all that to be said, I think it'll be cool if we can get all 3 of those guys eventually, or something to that effect. But if we don't, then we have more slots to qualify players through. And that's why we are actually doing 2 qualifiers for now. The second Gauntlet will also be open to players who failed the first Gauntlet, so they'll be able to run a second Gauntlet if they want to. And the Gauntlets are always double elimination. I was thinking about triple elimination for a single Gauntlet, but I think it's better to do 2 separate ones. And the other reason why it's good to do 2 separate ones is that Nablime and I are going to most likely be casting the Gauntlet stage here in the context of maybe the new fraud launcher being up, ideally by that point, and also the idea that, hey, you're new to the Cosmonarchy, you're from CPL or Brood War, StarCraft 2, some sort of newbie stream, basically is the idea behind it. We're going to cast it in a way that is friendly to those types of players. And Nablime and I are going to have some conversations about how we exactly want to approach that. Like, are we going to use the old names, or are we going to say, like, this is like that, or, stuff like that. We're probably going to draw a lot of analogies to StarCraft 1. In fact, by the time this podcast comes out, my cast the match between Hamster and Nablime that releases on the 19th of March will also be out. And so you guys can check that out. I think that's the kind of like caliber of cast I'm talking about when it comes to trying to draw analogies and intro people in. We're going to be talking a lot about the sort of like hammering home certain mechanics, like harvesting Vespene straight from the source, the way that the new macro mechanics work with workers, the fact that we have the worker queues as a thing that you can do, and all sorts of details like that. Anything that comes up that's novel, we'll try to at least name drop it and mention it, so that people don't maybe think that they're going crazy because something is happening that doesn't normally happen in a StarCraft game. I actually tried to be drawing analogies to both StarCraft 1 and 2 in the cast that I was just referencing, so you guys can check that out for as an example, if you will. But for sure, there's definitely going to be some details there that we want to try to iron out. And on the side of the Gauntlet, we have 12 players already signed up, and I think it's less than 24 hours after my announcement of it. So that's actually really promising and exciting. I'm not sure if we're going to get any more submissions, but 12 is the same number that we used or maybe we used 11. I actually can't remember. Either way, 12 is the same number that we initially had signed up for the first Gauntlet back in Ascension 7's days. And that took a little bit more time to iron out and fill in. And even still, we have some players who may decide to sign up that haven't yet. Players like Balethal, players like It Depends, there's definitely some other people that I've reached out to more recently, Urbon and Terror, stuff like that. So there's going to be some people who undoubtedly end up at least having some interest in doing it. We have more slots. We can accept as many people as sign up for now. If we end up getting like 50 players or something, then maybe that would be more challenging. But, that doesn't seem like we're in, we're worried about it or anything like that. There is, of course, a high chance that maybe we have people like the Night Fox or Akko eventually step in as well, since they've been playing a lot, and I think they could make it to the battlement stage. Like, there's players who maybe count themselves out right now, but they don't realize that they are in for the running for the middle of the pack. Players like 3Crow and Biddy B may very well make it in through the Gauntlet, but they'll have to face people like Newt, Art of Turtle, Benno, Jack Yelangsky, that's the top 4 of the people that have signed up, and so they are currently getting a bye. But if we get more players in, then if we had 16 players, for example, there would be nobody with a bye, and everybody would have to play 3 series minimum in order to complete their qualification, which is pretty cool if we can do something like that. But Moonhunter is making a return. We love that. We do have a new person named General Anakin, also known as DeWold, as far as I understand. That's one of the homies of the Beaver, who is also signed up. And so I'm looking forward to seeing stuff like that, some new faces maybe, even if it's newer faces, like, again, Art of Turtle's in there, HelltRYKS in there. So I'm excited to see where things go, and I'm glad to offer that as an option. And yeah, I'm a fan. I always love the Gauntlet. It feels like the whole week or 2 that it takes to run all of the matches is kind of like this epic celebration or spectacle of Cosmonarchy in that respect. And there's definitely an option for me to just be like, oh, hey, I'm dev streaming and some matches are going to go live. Well, let's switch over and cast those, boys. And then I can release the Gauntlet Mega VOD like I did the last time. So I think shit like that could be really cool. Anyway, it's worth a shot, worth a shout. So, with all that said, what other players do we have? Like I said, we've got 12 players signed up. I'll just run through the gamut here based on the seeding that I was mentioning earlier. So from the higher the name on this list, the higher their seed is. So we've got Newt Terran, HelltRYKS Zerg, Benno Protoss, Art of Turtle Zerg, Three Crow Protoss, Biddy Bee Protoss, Nicholas Terran, Dead Infested Terran, Moonhunter Terran, Benza Zerg, the Beaver 99 Terran, and General Anakin Protoss. The reason why those 2 are at the very end is because they seem to be the least active. I guess Benza is technically the least active, but the Beaver and General Anakin, I think the seeding is not actually correct to put them at the very bottom, because they've been playing 1v1s against each other a lot and some AI games and stuff. And I don't think Benza's been active at all. I don't think Moonhunter's been active at all. So I could be swayed to conceivably change up the seeding a little bit, which would change up the first round matchups there. But I think it's worth pointing out that, hey, I have no idea how, maybe I think Beaver might not have a winning record against General Anakin. So in theory, he should be a higher seed. But these are things where it's unconfirmed. I haven't seen them play. I haven't seen them, what their current form is like. And, we have to wait and see. So I'm looking forward to seeing how things shake up. And if you guys remember in the last Gauntlet, I decided to seed people based on their performance that I had seen. And then Sipiak went into the fucking gym, hit the bag, went to the dojo, practiced his moves, and he came out a swinging and almost qualified, and then eventually had to be summoned up anyway because Mystery Meat pulled out. So a worthy contender, a worthy inclusion into the whole round. And for me, I don't know, man, I'm really excited about stuff like that. So maybe there will be stories like that where the seeding is very much incorrect. But I'm doing my best. And, even though I want to maybe read into people's current form based on rumors and stuff, I think it's the responsible thing to do as a tournament operator is to use the seeding based on the data that you have seen and that you are aware of. And so if I had to do that, I have no idea what the form is of General Anakin. I roughly know how the Beaver 99 played in the last couple of tournaments, right? The last couple of times he played. I think he's probably improved lately because he's probably practicing a bit more. And I know that Benza is at a pretty good spot. Moonhunter defeated him last time in the tournament, so that's why Moonhunter is seated above him. But those 2 are probably around the same spot. And then Dead Infested is above them because Dead Infested has been playing a lot more recently. And then you go up the rank again. It's Nicholas, Scholar, XD Man, Aromavirus. That guy is struggles versus the other races, but very, very good in TVT. So, if there are Terran versus Terrans in this matchup, with him involved, I would actually say he's a scary opponent to go up against in that respect, because he optimizes his macro very well. In that particular matchup, he also just has more units, and so that's a little bit easier for him to find success. Whereas in the other matchups, when it gets more on the technical knowledge-based side, he does struggle. So just some more things to think about, more things to consider. But that's the preview that I have for you right now. Again, exact player numbers may change. The exact names who are playing are certainly liable to grow. And I'm very excited to kick that one off. And again, there will be a second Gauntlet to play. And players who do not make it through this Gauntlet can play in that Gauntlet as well. So I'm sure we'll see some repeat names in that respect. Also worth noting that by qualifying through the Gauntlet, you will get some money. That is due to our sponsor, the Pickup Partner, also known as Ben Taberski's Moving Company. So check that out. Biddy B's been sending in the bounties and the money and the maps and all this other stuff. However, I'm a big fan of the way that this whole thing has gone, because for my money, from my perspective, and for his money too, apparently, like this whole project's pretty cool, and we're getting the prize money coming in, and his sponsorship is a real big part of that. So we ended up using $100 of the sponsorship that he did contribute to give $50 prize pools to each one of these gauntlets. So first place, the qualification through the upper bracket, which means you haven't lost a single match, gives you $15, and qualifying through the lower bracket gives you $10. So that is in total, if we're doing 4 players per bracket, that will be your qualification money there. And if we can add a little bit more cash there, if we have to qualify like 5th and 6th players or something, then that maybe that's $5 or maybe that's still 10 because it's still through the lower bracket or whatever. I guess it would be the lower bracket, but whatever. You get the idea. So the exact number may change in that respect, but that's pretty good right there. I think that's pretty solid. So that's pretty much it for the Gauntlet. I'm really excited to see what happens with it. So I think it's a good time as any to talk about what is happening after Acropolis numero uno, and also what's going to happen while Acropolis numero uno is taking shape and kicking up steam. The main thing that I'm going to be focused on, aside from the audiovisuals, which we covered earlier, is the Protoss tutorial, trying to finish that up sooner rather than later. I have definitely been a fan of the feedback that I got for the Terran tutorial. There was some positive feedback and a lot of constructive, not necessarily criticism, but like pointing out like, hey, you could add this, or this might be useful, and just actionable feedback, I would say, in addition to people just saying that they enjoyed it, which is nice. I don't mind that. But I also have to say, it's not that it always feels nice when somebody says something nice about the work that you do, particularly if they say it in superlative terms, like, wow, this is way better than anything else and stuff. And yeah, I get that. But not to sound like, I don't know, like I don't want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn too much, because that's not really the point that I'm making with this. But the average single player content for RTS, especially the average tutorial for RTS, and the average tutorial in any game is not very good. And so I actually don't think that the tutorial that we have, the Terran tutorial that we currently have upright for Cosmonarchy, is particularly good. But it does teach you an important lesson, which is that the fastest way to learn is to fail and then study what you did wrong, or at least like think about it, even if you don't have it in front of you. And so there's a great option great piece of feedback that I got from Jesse, one of our latest contributors. Or financial backers, I should say, over on the Coffee website. He had said that it would be great if there would be a point where the dialogue mentions watching the replay, because you can actually watch replays of the campaign missions, the tutorials and stuff. And we should add a watch replay button to the score screen, so that's obviously something to point out. But also beyond the score screen part, there's definitely the option to just consider certain details, like maybe there should be dialogue that mentions the enemy, the shit talking guy, the drill sergeant should maybe have a couple of lines where he mentions like, you're gonna stand to me with that, like referencing your army, saying stuff like, you don't even have any tier 2 stuff up yet. Obviously we would have better nomenclature for this that's more in character, but talking about how you're a disgrace for something like this, and then that could be like the stick, and the carrot version of that would be your buddy McCrill saying like, hey man, don't worry about him, just build up your Atlas, get your add-ons online, and then you'll be able to build the same stuff, something like that, just coaching you through that, but not in a way where you don't know it, in a way that it's more like reminding the character that you're playing as. And then like the protagonist of the mission does know all this stuff, but it's, for newer players, it's really easy to actually forget that you've even been in a situation like this. So I would say that's actually another thing to point out too, is that like maybe we could even work that into the dialogue. Like, did you forget to do this or something like that? But obviously done written in a bit of a better way than that. So yeah, I don't know. There's going to be a script write update for that will then turn into like voice acting update. Now that Mesk is no longer super active since he's left the server, It's pretty unlikely that I'll be able to get him to reprise his role. So I will probably be looking for somebody else to donate their voice, so to speak. But, I do have to shout out Mesk for doing the initial acting and getting that stuff taken care of, because it definitely gave me a lot of, it gave me the necessary, text or audio files and stuff, the resources, the assets required to make the first draft run and presentable, like barely, baseline presentable and stuff. So I'm a fan of that. But yes, the Protoss tutorial is in a pretty good spot right now in terms of its layout, in terms of the enemy. I have not drafted their AI too much yet. I have a little bit of an opener for them, and that's about it right now, but I'll be working on their scaling later on. The main thing, though, is the script. Once I get the script written out, and I've covered everything about like every structure you can make as Protoss, and maybe I'll even have to have some sort of permutations for the idea of like, maybe not every individual structure. Like if you go for a synthetic cyanide by 7 minutes, like Hamster likes to do his drop with the Demiurge, then that's like a very specific thing. But rather than worrying about trying to draft dialogue for every single one of those, maybe I just detect when the Protoss player has like before 10 minutes, they've got like a tier 4 or tier 3 tech structure. That would be a point where, your commanding officer, so to speak, your aide there would be somebody who might say stuff like I see you're hoping for power to win the day, something like that, to reference the fact that you're tech rushing in the first place. And so I think that would be an astute observation to make, and to just like have that feedback of like, okay, well, he'll restate, or just state to begin with, the goals that you have as a player by building that kind of structure early on, so that so to speak, even if you just decided to make this and you're not really sure what it does, you'll at least have the inkling that, oh, I made it early enough that my aide here is reacting as if I'm going to be like doing some kind of all-in play where I'm trying to fight around a specific single unit. That can definitely be something that we like try to indicate based on the dialogue. Something like, if he is prepared for this, you will. You may falter, or something like that, stuff like that. We can make it sound Protoss-y, obviously. So, I don't know. I think the dynamic I have planned for that is working out pretty well on paper. We'll see how it works out in practice, of course. But looking forward to banging out the rest of the script, which is pretty close to completion, I think. At least the events are there, so I know exactly what to write. But the style is written down too, so I know the style that I'm going to write the rest of the dialogue events in, which is really important for me. So, or for my process, I should say. So there's that, and then there's obviously, like the tutorials take a lot of additional script writing and consideration, whereas the other campaign missions and stuff are a lot easier to wrangle because I'll just have the assumption that you're taken care of in that respect. There's another suggestion for tutorials that was basically like war games, where you'd have scenarios that are not melee starts, or maybe the melee start would be like the initial scenario, but the scenario might be responding to early pressure. So that could probably be like a whole mini campaign or sequence of maps or whatever, where maybe that could be the prelude into Further Notice, where you play against Osina, and that could be kind of interesting. Where maybe the war games are like an option that you can play that leads up into that, and the war games basically teach you the Terran stuff, and it would basically be like maybe the first round is you getting anchor pushed or warden rushed or something, proxied, something like that. And, teaching you that once you break that, it's actually pretty easy to defeat the enemy. And that would be like the melee start, right? And maybe there would be another one that's like a melee start that's, a timing push or something. But then there might be one that's like you start off at tier 2, like Jesse was suggesting in the chat yesterday. And, stuff like that can be really beneficial potentially for learning and practicing these more novel concepts, or these individual things that are like, okay, you've got this thing and this is a practice drill, play from this point onward and see what you can do. That will require some finagling with the AI, but it's not impossible. So that might be something that I look into after the other tutorials are done. Although I am very much bullish on the idea of starting off the campaigns again, working on To Touch the Sun and Day of Blood and all this other stuff. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, I guess that this neatly segues into the last subject of the whole podcast before we get into the all important coffee questions. And that's talking about what my focus after this first Acropolis tournament is going to be. I'm not sure when the next event will be after this, if we're going to do like a straight up into another invitational in a couple of weeks or whatever. But I do want to go back to single player content and focusing on not just banging out the tutorials, but the campaigns. I'm also really, really excited to get started on the SCSI. Which does mean that we need to go back to looking at things like the iScript extension and other such details. That might be something that maybe I can pick Akko's brains about now that he's involved in the project a bit more, since I'm sure that's something that is more exciting to people who are coming at it from an outside of Brood War perspective. They might be more interested even more interested in the project. People like that if there's additional races planned and stuff like that. So although he's not so much of a single player content guy, I noticed, but just that particular example could be interesting. Nonetheless, though, these kinds of difficult technical problems, if we can start to get more programmers and programmer-minded types to sort of consult on that or like post about the issue more publicly than just Veek, DF, and myself, who have been the ones mostly trying to bang our heads against this task for a while, I think there's a glimmer of hope there that we'll actually be able to maybe resolve it or solve some particular problem in a way that we didn't consider, or maybe the solution is more obvious there. I do know that there's a lot of things that I want to, sort of focus on in general, and the Acropolis focus, the competitive focus that's kicked in ever since we started March Invitational A. It does take away some of the time for that, but this week is really good for me because I do have it completely off the part-time. And it's starting to make me think of like, I could get used to this kind of thing. I could get a taste for this where, maybe I were to reduce my hours more often or something. If I was able to, I guess you could say support myself off of the coffee donations a little bit more. And those have been growing at a reasonable rate at this point in terms of the monthly subscribers to the coffee page. So I'm not saying I can do that in the near future, but I'm saying that if it continues to grow this way, that could be a thing that unlocks a lot of productivity in the future, is me not needing to work my part-time as much. Because I was able to go from 4 days to 3, but then I had to go back to 4 for a brief period of time. Then I went back to 3 and then had this vacation. I'll be going back to 3 or 4, depending on the exact state of finances once I am done with this vacation. And that will impinge upon my ability to do certain details. But I actually don't think it's that difficult for me, if I'm not working as often, to simultaneously work on the competitive side and the single player side, or the content or the audiovisuals or the technical problems like the iScript extension to allow the 4th race to be added and stuff like that. I think it's actually a lot easier for me to balance all of that stuff when I don't have to also do the real life stuff, the part-time work shift. And I know my situation is, I'm blessed to be in my situation. I'm not saying that to complain. It's more so an observation, pretty detached emotionally. If anything, I'm kind of excited about it, that I can foresee a world where, as the project continues to pick up steam and we continue to get more people in, there's going to be some people who are interested in supporting it financially and providing more value, or rewarding it for the value that it provides them. And that's going to make the project better. And that, it's kind of like a positive feedback loop in that respect, where I'm able to, dedicate more time to making it. And so I could foresee a world where we enter into that territory where I'm not saying I can do this full time, but that I can do this more closer to full time than I currently do. I mean, I work full-time hours on it anyway, but maybe I'd be more fiscally, rewarded for that. And of course, Veek earns half of what we make off the coffee anyway. So just as an example of what's going on there. And one of the other things is if we ever get to a magical world where I actually have additional, expendable income to spend on things, like I probably wouldn't spend it on myself beyond maybe like adding more hard drives for redundancy, backup, etc., which is in a way it's like project security more than anything, because this is the main thing that I do with my computer. But also it would be really good in the context of building out things like the not the prize pools, but I'm thinking about like paying, for example, like sending Solstice some money for all the graphics he's made. And maybe I can even find a way to make, give DF some money for all the stuff he's contributed. Although he has a weird setup where if I give him too much money, then he gets like reduced in his normal stipend. So it's a little bit annoying there where I'd have to give him like thousands of dollars, which I'm not saying he hasn't earned or worked in enough to justify. It's just that's not feasible, not realistic right now. But that's just another example of stuff where it's like, I think about that a lot. I think about all the value people have added to the project and to the work and spread the word and all this other stuff. And I think about, it would be so nice if I could just, even if it was a one-time gift almost of like, here's like $50 or here's $100 or whatever, and say like, hey man, thanks for all the work you've done. Here you go, man. Like, here's something, a token of my generosity, or my gratitude rather, for your generosity, really, and your contributions. I really appreciate that. So, I know money isn't everything, but when you're not swimming in it, it feels like there's a lot of things you would want to send the money to or put the money towards. A lot of it isn't actually self-aggrandizing. A lot of it is, rewarding other people for the things that they've done for you. And based on that, it's like, yeah, it would be really great if I could do that more often, if I had the spare capital to do that. So, there's many stages to this sort of thing. The first stage is being able to reduce my hours at the part-time so that I can do this stuff more often, and we can have this balance between competitive and content-oriented stuff and a little bit more frequently, instead of basically having to do no competitive, all content, and then, no content, all competitive, or, something closer to that, which is kind of how it's been for the last 6 months to a year. But once we get past that stage, and then I can start to really say like, hey man, thanks so much for your help, and send off some money. And I've talked about this before, but it would be great if we could like pay the people that made maps that we were playing on in the competitive tournaments, right? Like pay B, Shambler. I won't pay myself, and Vika and I get money already, but like stuff like that. This is the kind of thing that would be great to be able to do, is just say, here's $50 for this map that we're going to use. We're not buying it off you per se, but like paying you in for the asset, because we're going to play, hundreds of games on this map potentially, or something like that. And it makes sense to do it. Makes sense to give it a run. So anyway, some thoughts on that. And again, to restate the title card here, my focus after Acropolis is content, is audiovisual improvements, is the tutorialization stuff, and getting campaigns up and running, but also working on that iScript extender so we can, at long last, resume development of the Ascosi tech tree. And I'm very excited about that too. So there you have it. Hey, check that thing out in the bottom left. What is that? It's coffee question time! And for this episode and future episodes, I will be leaving that on the screen during answering coffee questions, and maybe also during the intro or something. Obviously, I'll pop it off every time between then, so that it's not distracting, because it does wiggle a little bit. We know we like wiggles here, but still, come on now. So what are coffee questions? Well, coffee questions are downstream of the coffee.com website. The link in the bottom left will take you to our page where you can pay us money. Half of it goes to me, half of it goes to Veek, some of it goes to Coffee and PayPal, but what's left, half of it goes between the two of us. We are collaborating on bringing you this project and doing all sorts of amazing things. Obviously, based on what I said in the previous section, there's a lot of work done by a lot of other people, like Solstice, DF, Short for Dark and Fantasies, Balethal, Scatumesk, Roller Skates. I'm sure I'm forgetting other people. Obviously, Biddy and Shambler have been making maps. The Beaver 99 been making maps. So yeah, 3Crow also been making UMSs. Big fan of all of that stuff. And NetherRealm even made some campaigns or campaign stuff way back in the day. So we still distribute that with the project. You can still check that out. So all that to be said, we have plenty of contributors. We also have a growing list of financial backers. And as a perk for the financial backers, you get podcast and conversation content 1 day early. You have access to a private chat where we just occasionally will hang out, and occasionally we'll do private streams as well. But the predominant perk that most people use, aside from the day early videos and stuff, is access to a channel question, or a question channel rather, where you can post questions. I answer them. Vika and I answer them when we do unique questions. And I think as a thing that I might start to roll out in the near future is posing questions for people who come on the show, if they are familiar with them. And so, that's an optional thing that people will be able to do, is like, hey, I'm announcing that I'm going to be asking this guy some questions. If you also want, some donor questions or whatever, post them. And maybe that's one of those things where I'll pick between the ones that are posted. I don't know if I can guarantee that, because maybe it's not like relevant to the conversation, but that's a little workshop there. So even then, we occasionally add more things that the coffee guys get, but that is the predominant use of the website for us. And you can just stay tuned and continue to contribute to this. It does make a big difference for us, as a small amount of money does add up monthly. over a long enough period of time. And if enough people did those small money donos, then hey, we wouldn't necessarily need to work so hard on the other details. We could just focus all of our attention onto this lovely project here and future games as well. Your support will eventually be used towards and put towards stuff after Cosmonarchy, outside of Cosmonarchy, like our own RTS games that are built in our own engine and our own environments, etc., etc. So without further ado, let's kick off the questions themselves. We have Myrian starting us off here, asking this is another case where he asked 2 questions, so I picked the one that I wanted to answer this time. He's free to, of course, submit the other one later on if he wants to. But this question is, how do you begin with determining the looks of a faction and communicating aspects of the faction's gameplay at a glance? So obviously this pertains to RTS games, or maybe it could pertain to other games as well. But I will answer this with the Ascozi as an example, since that's a race that's forthcoming to Cosmonarchy. I know that they're going to have a lot of interesting sort of like explosive sort of play that is based around the idea of them being able to benefit a lot from micromanagement. And so the first thing that I do when determining the looks of a faction is I think about what are the applications of this? Why would they look this way and not another way? What are the advantages and disadvantages of looking a certain way? And for the Ascozi, they're going to have a lot of interesting shape language to them where it is going to help set them apart. They're going to have materials and I guess like construction with metal and stuff that's going to be evocative in some ways of the Terran arsenal, where maybe in terms of some color scheme, although they're also going to hopefully be able to use a lot of green. I say hopefully because the palette for StarCraft is limited in greens. But the thought process was that there would be like green, dark green, gray, gunmetal, chrome, which isn't, aside from the fact that it's green instead of blue, it's not actually that different from the Terran arsenal, but the shapes of it is going to be very different, much more curved surfaces and a lot of additional like rings and concentric spheres and stuff like that. You're going to see a lot of details that are more about that sort of thing. I have talked before about stuff similar to Tesla coils in terms of their construction, or lava lamps even, and those like really fluorescent bulbs from like the 70s and stuff from way back. So there's a lot of inspiration that goes into that. That's basically like, almost like before the brutalist architecture took over. It's like the 50s or 40s, like futurist sort of technology, the way that their architecture was kind of designed and stylized, and things like even, the Jetsons or whatever, stuff like that. You might see shapes that are kind of evocative of that era. And the reason I'm doing that is to set them apart from the Terrans while still making it clear that they are a technologically conventional race in some ways, where they use technology, they use construction, they use structures and vehicles as a key part of their empire and war machine. Empire being less of a technical term and more of like a broad approach to talking about a regency's power, or a faction's power in this case. So that's why I've decided to go with them. I know that they are a technological, conventional regency or faction or race. In the case of Cosmonarchy, we use race for that term. I know that they are a race of, transhumanists in some way, although you can't call them human, transascosiists, in the context of the idea that they have used robotics, cybernetics to replace part of their biological material. And they've done this not because they want to, but because they have to. So that's another thing that I would like to indicate, is maybe not that to make it look like it's painful or dissatisfying in some way, but maybe help try to make it so that the more cybernetic they look, the more hollow they look, or the less lifelike they are. And this might even be subtle things, like maybe they've got idle animations for the early troopers, but as they get more cybernetic, they become more stolid, more golem-like, more, and if you look at the etymology of a golem, you look at what that actually means in Jewish ideology and stuff. Yeah, it's not ideology, mythology. That's like one example of like, oh shit, like, yeah, okay, all right, well, I can see where this is coming from. They're losing their soul in some way, playing around with ideas like that. So there's definitely a healthy amount of like, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of telling cool stories and making it so that those the stories that we're telling and the stories we're communicating visually stand out from the rest of the pack of the stories that are involved, like in Xibalba, where we plan to have 20 completely different playable regencies, some of which have many races associated with them. We need some unifying design ethic for all of them that is also distinct from the other regencies, so that you don't have readability issues thinking you're fighting Ansifi when you're fighting, Keltar or Makreldas or whatever. No, they all need to be very distinct visually. And this might limit the number of palette colors that we can pick, a color palette, not in the sense of the technical term for it, but in the sense of like, oh yeah, the macro DOS need to be like blue and brown, and that's it. You can't have like other colors because it's just going to be confusing. But I think you could probably play around with highlights and stuff. In the context of the context, I guess the thought process behind the Ascosi, we're not making them blue because Terrans are already like blue, chrome, achromatic. We're going to make them green so that they have that feature associated with them, and then that aspect will help them stand out despite, and also the other thing is the silhouettes, the shape language, the fact that it's more spherical as opposed to boxy. A lot of their work, a lot of their structures, a lot of their vehicles, a lot of their equipment is going to look a lot more foreign in that respect, shaped in, maybe stuff that would be a lot harder to, or maybe impractical for Terrans to produce in mass. And that's also in many ways aided by the fact that we have those cybernetic aspects to them. It's like, okay, they're more than what you can get from a conventional arsenal or construction because of that. So there's the fact that it's unwieldy and impractical to produce that stuff for Terrans means that it must not be that unwieldy or impractical because they're doing it. So that's another hint at the cybernetic part. So there's like, those interactions are going into the design of the looks as well. Now, how do I communicate the gameplay? I think the impracticality or the idea of like, oh, that looks like it would be impractical for us, but it's clearly practical for them is actually exactly what I'm thinking behind some of you can describe the way that their vehicles, maroon themselves and ground themselves upon taking too much damage and then become a lot less, painful or a lot less, I guess you could say a lot more durable, a lot less vulnerable and maybe more deadly in some way. That's a lot less practical than, just being able to pick where you deploy as Terran. And yet they do that. The fact that they rely on their allies to jump between them, that would seem a lot less practical for Protoss, which even though they're collectivist in some ways and they think of themselves as, having a shared purpose, they might not want to rely on each other in the context of, I literally can't use some of my capabilities without an ally nearby. They have some support units, but a lot of the time it's like less frequent, whereas a lot of the Ascosi are going to be support units in the context of like, they'll get bigger or better in terms of having allies nearby. And those allies don't necessarily have to be the same unit type either. So it's not like Legionnaires, which are a little bit more like, oh, I need other Legionnaires nearby. It's not like Sycophants, where a lot of Sycophants nearby will help other units. It's like, you can kind of mix and match a lot for the Ascosi. And that also would seem incredulous, maybe impractical. So like we're kind of echoing that aspect into their gameplay design. And really, obviously, the gameplay design came first, and then I backdoored how I would design their visuals based a lot on that. And so I would say that there's a lot of that where it starts with the gameplay. It starts with thinking about what's going to make them set themselves apart from all the other playable factions in the game at the time, or the other playable factions that are planned. And then you think about like, okay, what can I do to their visuals that also admittedly set them apart from the other factions, but also hint or echo or communicate, at least to imply some of these weird things about them where they're stronger together and they're, impractically dependent upon each other. And then there's also some lore related stuff like that as well, where they do have a little bit of a not really a mono consciousness, but they have, I wouldn't call it like a hive mind, but they have the ability to read each other's thoughts in many ways. And so that helps them communicate. And that does mean that they're reliant on each other being truthful and, or not truthful, forthcoming, I would say. And they're reliant on options for that stuff. And so, there's aspects of it where that kind of thematic is present in their visuals, in their gameplay, and also in their lore, their writing, their sociology and stuff like that, their social construction. So, I try to make it so that it all kind of rhymes with itself in some ways to sort of piggyback off of the immortal George Lucas quote. Hopefully that answered your question, Myrian, and thank you for your continued support. Moving on to Three Crow's question, he asks, if you had to choose a Xibalba faction to use as the base for an RPG game, which one would you choose, and how would you go about it? Well, now that I have the Regency page up so I can take a look at all of my options, I should mention that RPGs usually leave a bad taste in my mouth because of the progression systems that they often employ. I guess maybe I'll cheat a little bit with this question and describe it as an action game instead, but there would definitely be a lot of customization, and I would like to think that the way that the progression would work is a little bit more on the organic side, where you simply learn more about the setting as time goes on, rather than leveling up in terms of stats or abilities that you get for just like, becoming more experienced by collecting points, which, you can grind for or you can get organically. It would probably instead be I guess as a bit of a tangent. So D&D tabletop games have this idea called milestone XP, which is much more organic than just, oh, you get 40 XP for killing this orc or whatever. And so the idea behind there is that you don't have murder hobo ideas. You could do that, but maybe it's not going to give you the same rewards that sort of playing a little bit more sensibly and less silly, less slapstick would. And so that's where milestone XP comes in. You can grind against the, killing a bunch of like level 1 farmers forever, but that's not going to give you the same rewards as going and completing a quest for the king. I don't know, some stuff like that, right? So milestone experience is way better than the other alternative of that does facilitate murder hobo styles where you just kill everybody and don't really care about anything. And I think that's great. However, I also think that XP systems in general are just wrong. And rather than having a level up system like that, there should be this idea that like you could think of it as milestone levels or milestone improvements. And it's like, you as a player on a meta level have understood the setting better and understood your place in the setting. And so, thinking about it like playing against somebody at a 1v1 in Cosmonarchy, well, you learn the units and they kill you with the strategy and then you play them again and they still kill you with the strategy, but you do a bit better. And then like eventually you defeat that strategy. Like this happened to Dead Infested versus Lundier just recently, earlier today on the day of recording, where Lundier kept on doing his cheeky play where he builds nothing but wardens and static defenses and he flies them around with the envoys. And it can be frustrating to play against, and Dead Infested did have a rage out, but he came back, he defeated it, and he felt so triumphant. I mean, it's not like he's got a winning record versus a strategy, but he figured out a way to defeat it. He posts the replay, he types, ha 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 ha, I won, I did it, and he feels great. And he should feel great in some aspect, right? Because he defeated the strategy that gave him so much trouble. That's a level up. It's like, oh, the result of you leveling up your play and your understanding and your strategy and thinking about it, that's the level up. If you can do that, if you can unlock that aspect in other games, in other matches where you're having trouble of Cosmonarchy or whatever, then that is where you can find a lot of success. I would do something like that for RPGs or action games, as I would probably just refer to them as more vaguely. And that's where I would go. So, and there's also like more organic things that you can do if you remove the idea of progression systems, because what would a progression system with a shooter involve? Well, maybe you can't, pick up weapons from the enemy, or maybe you can't pick them up and keep them permanently. You can only pick them up temporarily. Maybe you can't use anything that anybody else has for some arbitrary gameplay reason. And it's just lame. And that's kind of how I think a lot of RPGs would go about it if they had shooting mechanics, is that, you can use this, but you're going to have penalties associated with it because you don't have you haven't spec'd into it or something like that, right? Like, oh, you only spec'd into pistols, not rifles, shit like that. I've seen that in 100 games. So I'd avoid all that stuff. And instead it would just be like, yes, you have your equipment that you can customize. You have your, relationships with the various people that you can customize by actually doing things for them or to them or around them. And, having their opinion of you change as a result. So that would be like some ground rules for how this would work. Is progression would be based on a player's meta level of understanding the setting. And the setting would be deep enough and the world would be deep enough that you would be able to play it multiple times, even if you only could play as one character or as one regency or whatever. You could play it multiple times, play it through many different ways, and it would react to you in that respect. That would be the ideal RPG to me, is that it actually, you are role playing and you are playing the role of whatever your character is, whatever you decide your character is. You customize it, but not in a way where you grind for levels, in a way where you express your intent in the world, and the world gives you the tools for that. The game gives you the tools for that. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but that I guess it kind of answers how I would go about it a little bit. So it's pertinent to the question. But for the regency that I would select, I've had some time to think about it, and I guess right now I'm just on a kick where I like the idea of a Keltar game like that, where you play as a Keltar and, maybe you start off in Keltar society and you have to, you can see like the challenges of, oh, I'm going to challenge you to a duel. And maybe if you lose that duel, then obviously your character's appearance is going to change because they're going to collect their trophies, which are, your mouth tendrils or, stuff like that. Right. And so like, you end up with one missing and the other one's longer. And it's like, oh shit. And then if you lose another one, you've got a really small one and people will react to you differently. That'll be like a reputation upon you. Like, like, yeah, say you've lost 2 battles in recent history. You've been defeated twice, and you can't even challenge somebody to, because they've got no trophy to take. They don't deem you worthy enough because you don't even have it hasn't even been long enough for your trophies to regrow, your future trophies for somebody else. And so, like, stuff like that is a part of the Keltar's biology and also their society. And so, being able to handle that would be really interesting to me. There is a concern that, like, if fire is used at any point and it, like, is supposed to paralyze the Keltar, that's fine in the context of, like, oh, there's a debuff that will apply to them for whatever reason. I wouldn't want it to hard counter them in an RTS sense, but in an RTS sense, you only use a couple units. Or you use many units, rather. In an RPG sense or action game sense, you have one guy, you're using just yourself. So that there's a concern there where, like, biologically, there needs to be some idea behind that. Maybe that could be why your character is special enough, is that he's got some fire fear resistance or something. And so, but you could choose to be, you could choose to be ironclad if you wanted to. Like, that would be a thing that you could do in Keltar society. You could complete the quest to be ironclad. You could be someone who commits, fratricide, so to speak. And if you end up doing that, you become a Kelkrot, a self-slayer. You were exiled, and you would eke out a hollow life as a pirate or something like that. You could do that. You could kill another Keltar and be exiled from society. Off you go, buddy. Find your own way. And that would be a hard life, and maybe you die. And maybe that could be another angle to go for, is maybe death is permanent, right? That could be kind of interesting. I know that would frustrate a lot of people, but that could give you a lot of... I think that would be pretty interesting to think about there. I don't know. It would be very controversial, but I'm thinking about that, and, like, that sounds really compelling. And also, as balls on the table, like, as a game designer, there's something appealing to me about saying, like, hey, you see this impossible task? Like, I don't know, what is your end goal? I would have to decide that. But doing that without dying, and if you die, you restart the whole thing, and you get a chance to play differently or whatever. That is pretty cool as a concept, and I just like the idea of you having to figure that out and stuff like that. So I guess I probably, in retrospect, or like thinking about it a little bit, as funny, or in a way, as the idea is, as luring as the idea is, the practicality of it is probably not that high. But that's sort of what I would be thinking about. Is I would use the Keltar for now. That's like a thought that I have. Other candidates could be the Githrovin, the Ansifi. Some of those characters. Maybe a Makrolon wouldn't be too bad, although, they're pretty powerful characters. And maybe that would be fine. Maybe that would be cool. But these are some of the things that I'm thinking about. And, as a Keltar, as a Xibalba game, you'd be able to move through the setting and explore, Ansifi space, Makrolon space. And, I don't know how much space there would be to explore to the other factions, because that would take a lot of effort just to make a Keltar zone, let alone all the zones for everything else. And then have it be a living, breathing world where action happens and you can contribute to the glory of your ken, so to speak, and all that stuff. So it's definitely a situation where it's hard to say, like, oh yeah, that would be easy. It definitely wouldn't. It would take, like, years to make a game like this. But that's sort of my thought, is like, that's how I would go about thinking about doing it. So there you go, 3Crow. I hope you appreciated that answer. We've got a question from HelltRYKS, longtime homie, who asks, as it seems that the tournaments are gaining more and more popularity, are you going to prioritize less on single-player content and more on competitive multiplayer content as to serve the current increasing player base? Well, homie, I do think that there's a boom and a bust cycle for Cosmonarchy competitive, and the boom cycle is when we have tournaments, and the bust cycle is when we don't have tournaments. So it's not much of a surprise to me seeing how we dipped in games played in between Ascension 7 and Winter Invitational to March Invitational A and the B event and stuff like that. I do think it's great that we're getting more popularity, or I guess you could say more play, more people are aware of us now, spreading through the Brood War community. I would say a little bit like wildfire. A lot of people are paying attention. We got Art0 obviously talking about it, and a lot of people being very bullish about it. So I'm happy about that. I'm excited about that. By the way, I think I said bullish like 3 times already in this podcast. Apparently it's my new favorite word, but it's cool. It's cool to see. And we also get people like Akko who just come out of the woodwork like nowhere. Where do you guys come from? And then, whatever, they find us some way. And so, like, it's cool to see that, the word of mouth is working on multiple communities, on multiple fronts. So that is cool. For sure, we are getting more popularity with the regards to the competitive place, the competitive player base. And so, but at the same time, I think there's a little bit of a churn. Like some players like Benza have been inactive for a while. He's coming back for the tournament, for the Gauntlet. There's some players like Sipiak who are sitting this one out. And not to call the people out by name, it's just like I'm giving examples so you guys can tell. It's not like everybody we had during Ascension 7, for example, is back with us still in terms of actively playing the game. And there's some people that are from like Mystery Meat, for example, is like a big name that's like AFK for now. And so without him involved, we have to train up new people. Like Hamster's kind of not necessarily replaced Mystery Meat, but like he's now a de facto like top 3 player, right? Clearly, because he's made the finals of the 6 and 7, and he's still playing pretty well. He wins his group in Invitational B and all that stuff. And then there's churn. There's some players who come in and some players that come out. And so as cool as it is that we have people like Urbon and Art0 playing, as cool as it is that Akko and the Night Fox look pretty promising for new recruits, as cool as it is that we keep getting more people interested in playing the more on a bit of a lower level like Lundier and Dead Infested and some of these other people, it's still really cool to also remember. You got to remember, like, hey, if we decide to take a pause for like 2 weeks on the tournaments or a month on the tournaments, well, we'll probably see way less games. And then like when I announce another tournament, that's when the games will spike back up, and then we'll play the tournament and games will still be there and stuff like that. So there's some people who play all the time. That's Nablime, that's Hamster, that's Newt to some degree. There's a lot of people who play all the time, right? And then there's a lot of other people who play only when there's a thing to play for or something to get into shape for. And I think that's kind of natural. So I just wanted to mention that. However, I'm not going to prioritize competitive over single player or whatever. I think, I obviously laid out some plans in this episode, talking about the tutorial, talking about campaigns, talking about how I'm really excited and interested and focused on the idea of building out those single player and cooperative experiences. I think they serve very different communities in some respects. Like there are people like Akko who seem not at all interested in the competitive stuff, or in the single player stuff. But Art0 was like, thinking about playing versus people, and then he played against the AI, and he realized, oh, the AI can actually help you learn in this game, and that's very different. And so I think that's important to know as well. And right now we only have the Terran tutorial and a couple Terran campaigns, but when we have Protoss tutorial and Protoss campaigns and Zerg tutorial and Zerg campaigns, then we'll actually have more for all people to learn. And Akko's suggestion of things like a strategy guide or some idea of like, here's what you can do against this. Even stuff like in the StarCraft 2 menu where it says like strong against and weak against, I think instead what we would probably have is like a list of compositions, and those compositions would say strong against, weak against other compositions. And so, or like pairs well with would be like one option, right? And can be defeated by, or, has to worry about, something like that, right? So it's a little bit more vague. It's not just like, countered by, right? Because that's basically what StarCraft 2 is. It counters and countered by. That's how you can translate strong against, weak against. So anyway, like, I think stuff like that will help the competitive side, and it'll also help the single player side too, like the people who want to play versus AI and do better. I think that those kinds of people play and they enjoy the project, and they Fuck the King and stuff like that. These people get really excited. Midori, there's a couple of other people who post every now and then who talk about playing 1v1s very occasionally, but much more interested and gung-ho about playing versus AI, or like playing the single player, or checking out new units when they show up and stuff like that. So I think that's a cool thing too, and we should definitely have content for those people. So no, I'm not going to prioritize competitive over single player per se. Obviously, there's some time that gets spent on the competitive stuff. But for example, like we could probably have made way more maps for the competitive side and made way more 1v1s had that been a focus of mine. But instead, I was working on the tutorial stuff and some other bounties. And like just earlier today, not today, 2 days ago, I fixed the turning so that it works properly now. So that's like a game mode thing. I did a bounty for Biddy Bees stuff as well. And so like, looking about it from that perspective, I'm actually still focused on stuff that isn't really related to competitive. Playing the turning doesn't really help you in competitive per se. Not any more than, it helps you less than playing competitive will, probably, because it's very non-standard. Playing, Omnipresence on Omnikin or otherwise, it also doesn't necessarily do the same thing, right? And so I'm just making that as a statement to say, hey, I'm actually, still pretty much splitting it 50-50 right now. Maybe it just looks like it's a lot of competitive stuff, but I'm also doing a lot of work on the content side. So have no fear. We will have plenty of content to cheer for, to appreciate, to play. So stay tuned for that. And thank you for your support, man. Let's move on to the Shambler's question. It's another doozy. He asks, what is the Orion Imperium's ruling class like? That's the very terse summary of what his question was. He's asking for a deep dive into the structure of the Imperium's ruling class, and he goes over some particular details. Obviously, so far to catch people up, I've mentioned that planetary governors are appointed to govern individual planets or systems, and they are often selected from the pool of individuals that were sent in as colonists or people who agreed to be part of the Imperium if they were not from the Imperium originally. And the idea is that if you select from that populace, then you're going to be selecting somebody who understands the locals, understands their needs, and can filter the needs of the Imperium to the people that they are serving, but also the needs of the people that they are serving to the Imperium as well. And so that way there can be, good communication. You're serving two masters, but in theory, they're both aligned. One set of masters being the Imperium and being more important in the grand scheme of things, and the other master being the people who you want to continue to respect and earn the respect of. And so that's one of the ways in which the structure works. Obviously, the word Imperium, Shambler goes on to say, the word Imperium at least implies the presence of an emperor or some other form of absolute leader, but neither of these shed much light on how power is actually doled out within the faction. Are governments hereditary positions? No, they're not hereditary. They're, like I said, they're appointed. They are usually installed after there has been, one of them is relieved of duty for, usually poor performance. Or maybe he'll step down and appoint a successor, which it's not necessarily hereditary in terms of genetics, right? But you might have that guy say, hey, this guy's going to take my place. But usually he's not able to do that without incurring the wrath of somebody. If he makes a poor choice, right, then people will turn on him as well. So you don't really want that. And the governors have a vested interest in being popular among their constituency, because if they're not popular, then there's unrest that grows. And if there's unrest that grows, they're going to get deposed by the Imperium anyway when they come in to put down the riots, as you'll see in Day of Blood, actually. So I would say there's a pretty big point to be made there where it's actually not as, people would probably assume that the Imperium is callous and evil, and they're not exactly doing it for anything other than self-serving means, but they're not really being callous and evil, are they? They're actually kind of, I guess, reasonable in some ways to think about. You could see why people would say, yeah, sure, well, the Imperium can defend us and take over some of the stuff and, take a percentage of what we're, of our land and such to build machines of war. And maybe a percentage of our people will be not conscripted, but recruited, I don't know, using different terminology. Maybe it will be conscripted, right? You don't know. And so there's an element where it's it actually kind of makes sense to go for stuff like that and to agree for stuff like that. So they make a good, compelling argument, and that is one of the main things to point out about the Imperium. Let me just quickly skim through the rest of this question. Are they from a specific cast of people? No, we already kind of answered that, right? Major power blocks similar to medieval houses. So, okay, getting into he's talking about the ruling class, obviously, more so than the governors. Who do the governors report to would be another way to answer this question. So there are actually, the governors often report to the military generals. There's a role, I'm blanking on the term for it right now, that I wrote it down somewhere, but there's a role that is more than general. That is, it's not Sky Marshal, but it's something kind of similar. Again, I'll have to dig up the term at some point. But the role that is basically a rank above general, that's not just military, but also interpersonal, political, whatever, sort of maintaining people. It's a people management role. And it's that is somebody who has his own sort of council of advisors, and some of those advisors are generals, and those will be the ones who advise him militarily speaking. So there's going to be commanders on the side of the military, and those also answer into the same people that the governors answer to. The governors answer to this big guy that's, again, not a Sky Marshal. It's something like that, though. And so, anyway, pointing that out is those kinds of people are running entire systems, but they can't do it alone. That's why they've got the advisors, and they're only going to be as good as their weakest advisor, their least competent advisor in a particular role. And so they absolutely need to make good selections for that too. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure for competence here, not to the point where there's never incompetence, but to the point where incompetence is punished swiftly with dismissal. And I'll leave it up to people's imagination what dismissal might look like, depending on the severity of the crime or the infraction. But those particular particular people, how did those people get into power? Are those positions hereditary? Are these, you'd say planetary system class individuals? Where do those people come from? And some of the time, it is a position of merit. Some of the time, it's a position that you might put somebody in position, install somebody in that kind of role from a nepotistic angle, in the context of as a political favor, because of the idea that this person will play nice with you elsewhere, and they have pull with their family, with a high-ranking family or a wealthy company or something like that. And the reason why you might do that is because, and it might not backfire, is actually because of the fact that maybe you can install him in a system that is not actively being, threatened, is currently doing pretty well. And essentially, again, if their advisors are able to run the show sort of for them, then there can be that kind of understanding behind closed doors where you kind of just nod this psycho boss guy to death and say, yeah, absolutely, sir, we'll get right on it. And then, maybe they're able to then sort of, yes, technically follow their decrees, but in a way that isn't going to be disastrous. Or maybe they can whisper in their ear and explain why maybe that wouldn't work, stuff like that. So you don't often get people like Nero, right, from Rome. You're not going to get people like that per se running stuff, but you can kind of imagine people with power, like emperor's powers over a planetary system, and that can go to your head, and that's why they have that's a main reason why there's this council that's set up around them, and where yes they sit at the head, and it's not like a vote can overrule the person per se, but they have final authority for system oriented matters, and that's the kind of thing that you want to watch out for. So who does the appointing if it's going to be somebody who's appointed? Who does the accepting if it's a position of merit where they say, hey, you've served us very well as governor. It's clearly this is a position where you have further additional tasks that you can complete, and more to give the Imperium, more to offer the Imperium. Are you interested in taking a step up in the ranks or something? And so, yes, there's jockeying for those kinds of positions, but who does the appointing? Well, I guess what I'll say about that is that there is actually a ruling sort of figure, and that ruling figure has the capacity to invoke or interfere in the, not just like legal authority, but it has the wherewithal, the ability to communicate directly to the offices of these individuals and make those kinds of decisions, and understands, essentially like human dynamics, I guess you would just say. It has a very strong sense. This figure has a very strong sense for how to navigate people. And that's all I will say about that particular situation, since I don't really want to shed too much light on it without being able to present it first. But that is who calls the shots behind the scenes, behind the curtain, so to speak. So there's your Wizard of Oz-like character, perhaps. But thanks for the question, Mr. Shambler. And we will see some more details from the Orion Imperium soon, and some content that will be forthcoming for Cosmonarchy. All right, we've got one more question to answer before we close out the show. This is from Jesse. He asks, in your opinion, what are the upper bounds of character trait expression via opponent AI? For instance, some AIs prefer air or ground, like to turtle or be aggressive, etc. But could an AI, via just its playstyle, exhibit human character flaws like hubris, tunnel vision, short-term thinking, etc.? Yeah, so I think it's actually a lot more interesting to express flaws in your opponent AI in campaigns than it is to, you can obviously express skills and stuff like that, but I think it leads to more interesting gameplay when you have say a 2v2 or an FFA or something, and some of the players are tunnel visioned on certain details, right? Some of the commanders are really hell-bent on doing a particular thing. And actually, I wanted Osina to be somebody who throws a lot of early game tier 1 stuff at you and takes a while to tech up, and also attacks into committed positions that are easily defendable. And that's in the further notice Terran tutorial. And I think I was mostly successful in that. Obviously, he will also steal your shit if you're not going to garrison the anchors. He'll take them, and so that's actually really spooky, because if you don't take those anchors, then you'll be you can see how that could be a good strategy, right? Is it if you were in his shoes and you stemmed your Mavericks up and ran directly into the anchors like that, that would obviously be a pretty good option, right? And so when I think about it from that perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense. But I also think that even if it didn't make sense, he would still do that. And that's because he wants to get this over with quickly. He wants to just be done with you. He's like, you're my last person that I have got to, defeat. So I'm just going to see if I can rush you down, basically. Especially since you have the context from the briefing of knowing that that guy just played a really long, grindy match and he's probably tired. And so, like, expressing that through the gameplay, I think makes sense. And I think it was a success overall, even though there's things that could be better about that guy's AI. There's definitely things that you can exploit. You can rush down the AI a lot in 1v1s in general. So if you don't do that, then maybe you're in for a world of pain. But that's just one example, right? So, asking the upper bounds for character expression. I mean, I think I would definitely fixate on the flaws and think about, okay, you have this flaw, which means that you have this weakness, but what does that weakness correspond to as far as a strength? The strength of the Osina approach is that he's just going to steamroll you if you're not careful. He's going to take your anchors if you don't take them first. He's going to surprise you by attacking you early on. He's going to really try to put the pressure on before you can necessarily get your bearings, particularly as a newer player. And he's going to do all that while kind of grading you down, while kind of grinding you down from a speech standpoint as well, where he just is so disinterested in fighting you. He thinks you're such, so beneath him, and in terms of a skill or of challenge or whatever. And so he's not at all interested in taking prisoners, so to speak. And so I think it's worth pointing all these details out because, that's the kind of thing where you can express that and then kind of like double down on it, or in a way when it comes to the thinking of like, the fact that he has these character traits and he's expressing it through his gameplay, the dialogue can go a step further then and be like, hey, we're capitalizing on this or underscoring it, putting a full stop at the end of that. Like it was already written on the page based on our gameplay, based on the way that this guy played. He's already being annoying and aggressive and relentless. But then his dialogue kind of like says hey, if you've noticed that, it's because it's true. And so that is kind of where I'm coming at from that perspective too. So I do think the dialogue can help like drive it home, basically. But I do think that the aggression level and the flaws and stuff are a big thing to focus on. And I also think that like we just haven't really seen AI have like a particular personality and then also have the dialogue kind of hammer that home. Where if Osina was with you and he was frustrated that his early rush was was failing, and he's your AI ally, and he makes a frustrated comment when it doesn't work out, then that's in character. That's in keeping with his character. But that's something that makes a lot more sense and gets I guess you notice it a lot better if you pay attention to what he's done in the context of the game and what his commands have led to when it comes to his soldiers and stuff. So if you want to use the more like role-playing terminology, in-universe terminology, Osina's commands and directives have led to, a lot of deaths maybe, and obviously a military failure if he's complaining about it, like, oh, his opponent is now going to be able to get their their economy online, their war machine thrumming easier because he won't have any more additional pressure. Or maybe he's now opened up to a counterattack where he wasn't previously. And so he's worried about that, or he's stressed out about that. He's frustrated that it didn't work. That's in keeping of his character in a way that I think you do want to use both dialogue and the expression, but you could also have a dance where it's just the gameplay is the dialogue in some way, and I do believe that is possible. I think dialogue should probably be used very like there should just be like a very short line here and there, right? I don't think it should be too long if it's going to be in the middle of the map. So yeah, upper bounds, I'm not sure. I'd say we're going to get closer with Cosmonarchy and with my other work, but I'd also say that it's anybody's guess as to how soon we see anybody else doing that, because I've been playing RTSs for a long time. I haven't really fought against an enemy where I felt like it was deliberately designed every step of the way, or even remotely attempted to be engineered, where like the dialogue corresponds to what they're actually doing. Sometimes the dialogue corresponds to what's happening in StarCraft 2, but that's all done through spawned in waves and bullshit. So it's not really organic, right? So anyway, that is the answer to your question. Hopefully it was on point, and hopefully gave you something to think about. Of course, I have to say that this is the end of the show. We are coming to the conclusion of this episode of Prototype. I think it was a nice meaty one. We got a lot of stuff done. Obviously, we talked for a while before we even got to the questions this time around, and we had a number of questions to get through. I hope you guys are excited for the future of Cosmonarchy. I feel like I say that every single time, but it's because I'm excited for the future of Cosmonarchy. We had Artosis look at it on stream to 1,600 people. That was pretty funny. That was pretty cool. Spread the clip around, and some people had some very funny reactions to it as well. And I'm very happy that we were able to get his eyes on it, even though obviously it was Protoss glassing Terran. I'm not as down on that as some people were. Some people were worried that maybe the Artosis clip is going to be like a bad thing for us. No, I think it's a good thing. He's aware of it now, and there's a high chance that I send him a clip of like infestation or something like that, where maybe like HelltRYKS is doing it to Shambler on infinite velocity, and he's got the infestation going, and I send him a clip of that, and it's Terrans dying, it's Terrans losing, but that's kind of like I want to drive the needle home. And then the third clip that I would send, because 3 would be Terran being successful with diadems and lifted anchors and stuff like that, and you get to see all that stuff. So I think that's going to be really cool when we get that in front of him. We'll see if he's down to potentially take a look at it anyway. But the fact that he knows about it, he found out about it on Sunday night, and he had no idea what it was before then, apparently. So I think there's hope yet to convince him to check it out. I don't think I'm not nearly as dour as some of the other outlooks were. But even if we don't get him to check it out, I think we've got enough of the other people around him to check it out. Like, obviously, we got people in his chat, mods. We've got, secret agents like Dead Infested. But we also have, Art of Turtle, Urban. Terror is available and interested and potentially is going to come in for the Gauntlet. And he's certainly aware of the project. DeWalt is aware of the project. Maybe he'll come in too. And so all of this stuff is to say, we've got a lot of people that are in the Brood War space, and it's going to be pretty hard to ignore us when more of those people continue to pop in. And so I just figured I would point that out, because for my money, I'm really happy about the idea of continuing to grow the player base, continuing to be made more aware of by other people. And shout out to Dead Infested and other people who have been spreading the word. I know Biddy B's been leaving comments all the time. I think somebody like Tasteless would actually be maybe more interested if I sent him the glassing clip, see what he has to say for it. So I might do that if I catch him streaming. He streams at weird hours for me because he's over in Korea, but still pretty cool stuff anyway. And so stuff that is worth putting out there in the world. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week for another one of these shows. Maybe some more interviews soon. Definitely more cast overs every day. And check us out, just pop on in, dude. See you then.